Hey, this is Sam, and we're back with another episode of the Mcat Master Interview Series. This is where I interview top Mcat scorers and extract their most useful Mcat study strategies, the inspiring moments, the recommendations, and so much more from their Mcat journey. So today I'm interviewing Sara Zayed. Sara, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to look back on the Mcat journey, having been through it and just having been done with it already.
Yeah, for sure. I can imagine. So I met Sara because I was reading articles on her blog, and in one of her articles, she had written about how she scored in the 99th percentile on the Mcat. And of course, I had to reach out to her, and here we are. Sara has been kind enough to share her biggest insights with you about her Mcat prep. So, like I said, Sara scored in the 99th percentile with a 522, but it definitely wasn't easy to get there. There were a lot of low points, as you're about to find out. So to start off, Sara, please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you a little bit before diving into the Mcat stuff.
So first of all, thank you so much for giving me this platform. I think it's really admirable that you put together these resources to help people in their own Mcat journey. And having been through it, I know how challenging it is and how helpful it was to find resources online that helps me kind of figure out what my plan was and move through prep feeling like I wasn't alone. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
About me, so I'm a non-traditional applicant to medical school. I actually graduated in 2016 with a bachelor's degree in computer science and a minor in math. And I wasn't intending to go to medical school at the time, but I had always been interested in medicine and healthcare. So I actually did take a bunch of pre-med classes when I was an undergrad, but my goal at the time wasn't to go to medical school. I actually got hired as a software engineer after I graduated, and I worked as a software engineer for 2 years. And throughout that time, even though the work was intellectually stimulating, a personal connection was missing. And I was growing my blog, Positivity, at the time, which is centered on health and wellness. And I started connecting with hundreds of women and doing research. And I actually attended a plant-based nutrition and healthcare conference, which featured their lineup of speakers were all physicians and researchers. So throughout that time period, I wouldn't say it was a switch that went off, but I would say it was this gradual realization that medicine would give me all the experiences that I was really interested in. It would give me that intellectual stimulation, and it would give me that interpersonal connection that I really wanted. And I got to indulge my interest in healthcare and medicine. So that's kind of the long and short of it.
Nice. That's great. It's usually the case when they realize that medicine is going to give them the most fulfillment. And that's from what we've seen, that's when people tend to be the most successful on this path. It's like they have their vision and their understanding of this is exactly what I want to do. They have that down in their minds.
Yeah, and I feel really lucky because I think that because I got a breadth of different experiences before I decided to go to medical school, I have experience and understanding that I feel like I wouldn't have had if I just graduated directly from undergrad and went straight to medical school. So
Right.
I think it was good that I kind of took this winding path to medicine because now I feel certain about what my mission is and what I want out of my career.
Nice. And to your blog, Positivity, what do you feel is your mission and what inspired you to create it and start sharing your knowledge and advice?
So it started off really as just a personal blog to share my own personal health journey. There were health issues that I experienced as a teenager, nothing major, but just chronic issues that were frustrating to deal with: poor sleep, bad skin, migraines, a whole host of things. And at one point, I just decided that I really wanted to feel better. And I started by changing my diet. I was already an avid exerciser, but exercise didn't get to the root of the problem, which was how I was eating and how I was living. So I changed my diet and I was blown away by how much better I felt. Like, I could not believe just how much better I was sleeping. My skin cleared up.
Yeah.
I just had so much more energy. And my blog really started off as a way to share that journey and experience. But it's evolved since then because now I've developed this interest in lifestyle medicine, which uses lifestyle interventions to prevent, reverse, and manage chronic diseases. And I think that chronic disease is one of, if not the most pressing issues in healthcare. And if we're to solve the healthcare crisis,
Mm-hmm.
we should get to the root of chronic diseases. So I, on my blog now, talk about whole food, plant-based nutrition, exercise, sleep, mindfulness, and social support, and share information and educate my followers and my readers on how they can change their habits. And I like to provide all the scientific evidence and the research that I've done to empower my readers and followers to be able to look at the information themselves, so that they take what I'm saying with a grain of salt and do their own research, because I found that understanding the information myself is what enabled me to fully incorporate the techniques and the lifestyle changes into my life. So I don't want to be someone who wags their finger at people. I
Yeah.
don't want people to take me at my word. I want people to feel inspired to look at the resources themselves, do the reading, watch the documentaries, read the books, and hopefully become convinced that they can change their life too. And it's not actually that hard, and they can have what they want out of their health.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And I think that's why I resonated so much with your posts and your blog, because I personally had experiences with using nutrition and diet to heal myself of an illness or that I had when I was younger. But it's funny because I feel like the world of medicine didn't quite understand that world of nutrition. None of my doctors understood it. And so like there was a clash. But when I look at you, you have a foot in both those worlds. And I don't know if you ever struggled with that at all.
I would say that because I'm not a physician yet, I wouldn't say that I have negative experiences so far with doctors,
Hmm.
because I currently work as a medical assistant in a lifestyle medical practice. So I work for Dr. Ron Weiss at Ethos Health, and he is board certified in internal medicine. He
Hmm.
graduated from New Jersey Medical School, and he's an assistant professor in clinical medicine there. So he has the traditional, conventional medical background. But in the clinic, we also counsel our patients on how to change their diets and how to change their lifestyles. And the transformations I've seen in people have been nothing short of incredible. So I think that I agree. I think that, nutrition isn't really taught in medical school, and for good reason. There's so much to learn, and a medical education is already so dense that I understand why, maybe in medical education previously it was hard to fit nutrition in, but I think now there's this changing landscape, and I think doctors really should become educated about how to counsel their patients on how to change their lifestyles. I think it's really important, and I think, like I said before, we can't really have a conversation about good health unless we talk about how people eat and the way they live. So I'm hoping by going to medical school that I can not only incorporate lifestyle medicine into my practice, but also hopefully help to participate in the shift in medical education that adds more emphasis to lifestyle.
I love that. That's great. That's awesome. So diving into the MCAT, if you could describe the MCAT in one word, what would that be and why?
Can I use two words?
Sure, sure.
I would say it was an uphill battle for sure. I had always been kind of terrified of the MCAT because, the longest exam I'd ever taken in undergrad was, 3 to 4 hours. And the idea of the 7 to 8 hour exam that covered all the sciences and critical reading skills, that I had to devote a huge chunk of my year to studying
Mhm.
and would largely determine where I would be able to interview at medical schools, was really scary to me. And I would say that being able to achieve the score that I did took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So yes, an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of people can relate to those exact sentiments. So before you began prepping for the MCAT, where were you? What was going on in your life at that time?
So in May 2018, I had left my job as a software engineer, and I needed to accumulate medical experiences. So I started working as a medical assistant. I also wanted to take any classes that I was missing from my pre-med resume of classes. So I actually AP'd out of bio when I was an undergrad, and I
Mm.
didn't think that that would cut it. So I took two more biology classes, and I took them with Harvard Extension School. So I took human endocrine physiology and I took genetics. And I also needed to take biochemistry for the Mcat. So I was taking those classes. I also took any labs that I was missing. And that's kind of where I was. I knew I wanted to finish out the fall semester of 2018 strong with those classes, and then
Hmm.
following start studying for the Mcat.
Nice. Do you feel like taking all of those classes right before your MCAT? And do you think that helped you with your knowledge and content?
I think that Unfortunately, where I was lacking was chemistry and physics. I did really well in my chem and physics classes when I was an undergraduate, but I hadn't taken
Mm,
them in years. So thankfully, the biology helped a lot. I felt like it brought me up to speed, and I really did use a lot of what I learned in my Mcat prep. Like I
yeah.
could basically skip all the endocrine review because I had already developed a strong foundation with the class that I took. But I would say that chem and physics was where I was lacking. So even though the classes did help, I still needed to do so much review and relearning on my own.
Hmm. Yeah. So when you began studying for the MCAT, what was your score goal? What were you aiming for, and how did you decide that?
So honestly, not to sound pretentious, but I was actually aiming for 528, and the reason is that I didn't want to spend my time reviewing and studying feeling like there were corners I could cut because I was aiming for a lower score. I wanted
Hmm.
to approach my studying with the sense that I need to master everything to be able to achieve the score that I did. There were a lot of times where I didn't want to review things in as much depth, but I had to keep reminding myself that I was aiming for the highest possible score I could achieve. And to do so, I had to go through the grind of learning things I really didn't want to spend time on. I would
Hmm.
say biochem was one of those things. Like, I think it's potentially my least favorite science. And I took that during the spring while I was studying for the MCAT.
Yeah.
And one advice I had read online was you should write down all your pathways and make sure you know them like the back of your hand. And I
Hmm.
was so resistant to that because it just wasn't interesting to me. But I realized that if I was going to achieve what I wanted to achieve, I had to follow the advice of people who had already traversed the path before me. And I actually am really grateful I did that because there were questions that came up that knowledge was useful for.
Wow, that's huge. And thank you for your honesty. In the back of their minds, a lot of people are thinking, yeah, I need to aim high, but it takes a lot of courage to really actually aim for a 528.
And I think that one advice I would give to anyone listening is don't undersell your abilities and don't question and doubt yourself. I think that a lot of people approach the MCAT or any academic challenge having this impression of their abilities and thinking that they can't really achieve what they would like to achieve if they could
Hmm.
choose the score that they could get. But I think a big part of being successful is believing that you're capable of doing well. And there were, in the initial stages of my studying, I didn't do as well as I wanted. I would do practice questions. Sometimes my performance was underwhelming.
Hmm.
I'd feel disappointed. I would feel like there was this huge mountain of studying and knowledge that I still had to go over. But I had to keep trusting myself and feeling like I was capable of doing it. And it was just a matter of doing the work.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And you've only taken the MCAT once, right?
But yeah, I took it once.
So you kind of just alluded to this, but what would you say were your biggest challenges, roadblocks, struggles that you experienced throughout your MCAT journey, and how did you overcome them? What did you do?
I would say the first challenge and roadblock was the fact
Hmm.
that there were so many years between me and my pre-medical courses. Like I said, I took a few before I started studying for the MCAT. So I took Orgo in the spring of 2018. I took endocrine and genetics in the fall of 2018, and then I took biochem while I was studying for the MCAT. But
Hmm.
other than that, there were, my chemistry and physics classes were really what I was lacking. And that I think spending the time relearning all of that was a huge challenge for me because I had forgotten so much of it. And
Hmm.
even though, like I said, I performed well when I was an undergrad, I pretty much had to study the Kaplan books like I was taking the class again.
Right.
And that was a huge challenge for me because for a while that was my weakest area. And I think that I had a tendency to get really discouraged. Like so much of your application to medical school rides on these numbers, unfortunately. Now, I wish that wasn't the case, but that's really the only standardized way to compare people and to rank them and to decide who to interview. So I put a lot of pressure on myself and I knew I wanted to apply this cycle. And
Hmm.
I basically take my MCAT in June because I felt like that was the latest advisable date to be able to get my score back and still be one of the early applicants, which is some advice that I read online that you should apply as early as possible in the cycle. So I had
Hmm.
set this deadline for myself, and throughout the whole journey of relearning and maybe not doing as well as I wanted to on practice exams and feeling disappointed and discouraged, there was this huge looming deadline that I had considered moving, but I was just like, I really wanted to apply this cycle and I kind of had to stick to that. And and do as much as I possibly could. And it was very stressful. I'm grateful because I had a lot of social support, and because everyone at work also knew that I was studying for the Mcat, they showed me a lot of compassion and support and cut me slack. There were days when we would finish seeing patients and I would just say, okay, I gotta go. And I would bounce and they would be understanding. And they would be understanding. So I would say those were my main challenges and roadblocks.
I see. So how long did you study for?
I studied, I would say like 6 months. So I started mid-January,
Mm-hmm.
and then my MCAT was June 15th.
Oh, nice. And so what would you say like the progression, when did you start seeing your score increase? Did it plateau at any time? If you could speak to that.
Sure. So I took my first practice exam in March. The reason being that I spent the first January, February doing content review because, like I said, there was so much I had to relearn. And
Mm-hmm.
I took the Kaplan diagnostic, which put me at a 503 at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take it to heart at the time because I knew it was just beginning. I was pleased that I did better than I thought I could do, but I knew that there was a long way to go. And that was kind of the beginning. As I kept studying, I used Kaplan diagnostics. And I want to say that the highest I achieved was like a 508 on the Kaplan diagnostics, the length practice exams. And then I moved to next step practice exams, and I kind of plateaued at like a 510 to 512. I think a 512 is actually the highest I achieved on next step. And then that was like a month before I moved to AAMC material. But I took 10 practice exams total. So I would take one every weekend. The only time I took a break was during Ramadan. So I was fasting for the whole month of Ramadan, and
Mm-hmm.
the 8-hour exam while I was fasting. Yeah, it just didn't work for me. I did it once and I needed I
Yeah.
needed the energy of food and water. So I took a
Right.
break then. I took practice exams total, and I kind of plateaued around 512. And then actually when I took my first AMC practice exam, I also got a 512. And that was like a month after I had taken the last next step exam. So at the
Mm-hmm.
time I was really disappointed because I felt like I had just done a month of rigorous study and it didn't amount to anything.
Wow. So you already kind of passed the competitive range when you hit that 512. Did any part of you be like, I'm okay with this kind of thing? Or like, were you still in your mind kind of pushing for the 520 plus? And was it because like you were aiming for particular med schools?
So I would say that it was kind of like I felt good enough that, okay, if I get a 512 on my MCAT, that means I'm still competitive. I can still apply to medical schools, and that's a good enough
Mm-hmm.
score to put in an application with. So that
Mm-hmm.
was reassuring. But I knew that because I'm a non-traditional applicant, I wanted my score to be as competitive as possible because there were some experiences that I didn't have in the years past because I didn't intend to go to medical school when I was in undergrad. So on one hand, that was good for my application because it gave me different experiences. But on the other hand, I was basically trying to fit in whatever I was missing in this year and a half of time after I left my previous job as a software engineer. And I
Mm-hmm.
just wanted to be as competitive as possible. And I didn't want to feel like there were schools I couldn't apply to because of my score. And since I live on the East Coast and I'm married and my husband works in the city, there were
Mm-hmm.
schools that I wanted to be able to apply to so that we could stay in this area and we wouldn't have to uproot our lives for the sake of my going to medical school. So remaining in this area was really important. Like I said, I put a lot of pressure on myself to be able to aim high.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm trying to envision kind of like your 6 month kind of journey. Do you remember how your schedule was like? If you would give us a brief overview.
Yeah, so mid to late February was strictly content review. So I
Mm-hmm.
bought the book set of Kaplan books, and basically I would do 2 chapters a day and alternate. So I would do like Orgo and critical reading one day, bio and physics one day, and the remaining 2 subjects on the other day. And I would
Mm-hmm.
alternate them and do practice questions at the end of the chapter, but that was all that I did. Then
Mm-hmm.
beginning in March, I would start taking practice exams almost every Sunday. So in that time, I started using Anki, which is the flashcard software. Highly
Yeah.
recommend, by the way, if you haven't used it already. I was a skeptic before I started using Anki, but it completely changed and revolutionized my study experience. So highly recommend you use that. But I would
Nice.
review my practice exams after I was done with them. Anything I didn't know, I would go back, study it, and then create an Anki card. That's another piece of advice I have is to create your own Anki deck. I know a lot of people use previously created Anki decks. Maybe that works for you, but I strongly
Mhm.
believe writing the card yourself, being able to put your own nuances and your own feedback into those cards, I think is really important. So while while I was doing that, reviewing my exams, I would continue working through the Kaplan books until I eventually finished all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that was basically how my week looked. It was like practice exam, review practice exam, fill it into Anki, and then finish the Kaplan books. Then once I hit April and May,
Mm-hmm.
I switched over completely to AAMC material. So I stopped using Next Step Kaplan. I continued using Anki, and I just exclusively devoted myself to AAMC material. So I did all of the material that was available. I did the section banks. I did the question packs. I did all their full length exams and basically ordered everything they possibly had and did all of those questions. And same thing, I would do the questions. I would review them if I got them wrong. Anything I didn't understand, I would put it into Anki. And then finally for Psych and Soc, I used I forget the name of it now, but it's available on Reddit. It's basically a pack of notes that someone compiled using the Khan Academy videos. And I used that and studied that for Psych and Soc. So I think that was a big part of my success in that section, was reading that and then creating flashcards and memorizing basically all the flashcards that I created. I didn't use any pre-made decks. I know that those were available, but I didn't use them. And the last 3 weeks, pretty much just taking AAMC practice exams, brushing up on anything that I didn't know, and just praying, basically.
Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like the last 2 months when you started using the AAMC material, that's also when you kind of plateaued at the 512. And it seems like that's when you got your score jump, right? To a 522. Is that right?
Yeah. So a lot of people say trust your full length scores because they're the most accurate representation of how you'll perform. I agree with that because obviously these practice exams were created by AAMC. So they're going to be the closest to what you're actually going to see on your test date. But I would also say that I had a 10-point jump in 2 weeks. I went from a 512 to a 522 on my second practice exam.
Wow.
And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think number one, people always say that the third party practice exams are so much harder than AAMC. So I think maybe I was too relaxed the first time I took the AAMC exam. And I would say it was really good to study and use harder material. So I would definitely recommend that people use Kaplan, use Next Step, and try and test their skills with different kinds of questions before they move to AAMC, because I think that's a stronger test taker. But I think one of the biggest things that changed in those 2 weeks was, first of all, I had to change my mindset, because I think before that I felt like I was still incapable of actually scoring as high as I wanted to. And then number two was I really drilled my Psych and Soc, and I really drilled my formula memorization. A lot of those things were gaps that I was missing. It wasn't that I didn't understand underlying concepts, but maybe I didn't know the name of like a psychological or sociological phenomena, or I didn't know the exact formula that I needed to use. So making sure to fill in those gaps and master those details was really important to me. Like those 2 weeks between the 512 and the 522 were really diligent, like nose to the books, memorize and understand anything that I was possibly missing or possibly slipped through the cracks. Like I went through that first exam with a fine-tooth comb. You have to be that dedicated and that rigorous and diligent to be able to master their exams, because there will be trick questions, there will be small details tested. The only way to really do well is to know all those small details and to be honest with yourself about your weak areas. And I had to just look myself in the mirror and ask myself what I didn't know, why I didn't know it, and how I was going to master it.
Wow, so many insights in there. I had a question. So do you feel like the score jump from a 502 to like 512 was easier or harder than the jump from 512 to 522?
I would say the initial jump was harder, from the 5-3 to the 512. That was really, really tough. Like I felt like I was moving at a snail's pace. And like I said, I took 10 practice exams. So it wasn't like I went from like a 503 to a 512 in a span of like 2 to 3 weeks. It was getting like a 503, then a 505, then a 508, back down to a 505. Like I was just yo-yoing between these scores. And I honestly felt like I wasn't progressing at all. Looking back, of course I was, because I was putting in the time every week to learn new things. But I felt stuck for a really long time. And I think the things that changed that were, number one, using Anki. Number two, I did the section bank and the question pack of the AAMC material before I took their full-length practice exams. And I think getting instant feedback from questions immediately, as opposed to doing a full-length practice exam, was really helpful. A lot of people, and this might just be different techniques, this is what worked for me, but I think a lot of people prefer to do like a pack of like 30 to 50 questions and then get all their feedback and then go over it. I prefer to do the question and then get the answer right away. And if I got it wrong, that helps me because you are still in the moment when you did the question. So you still have insight and understanding into your thought process as to why you selected the answer you did. Whereas when I took my like 8-hour practice exams and then I scored it all at once and I went back to it like 1 or 2 days later, I couldn't necessarily reconstruct the logic that I went through in the moment. So I think doing that was really helpful. I also started doing UWorld. That is another huge piece of advice. Like if your listeners take anything away from this interview, I think number 1, it should be Anki. Number 2, it should be UWorld, because UWorld is just such an incredible resource. It's a bank of like 1,900 Mcat questions. It's an investment. I think it costs like $300 to purchase all the questions, and you get access for like 6 months. I'm not totally sure, but it's something like that. But their questions are phenomenal. I only did basically the chemistry and physics questions because I was running out of time. I honestly think that had I done all 1,900 questions, I would have been able to score even higher. That's how valuable I think it was. You get instant feedback, or you can choose to get instant feedback. Like I just said, that's what works for me because you reconstruct the logic you were going through in the moment. But also the explanations are incredibly detailed. So I didn't have to refer to my books. I didn't have to do research. The explanation for all the answer choices were right there, complete with diagrams if the question called for it. And it was really easy for me to create my Anki card based on those answers. UWorld also has a built-in functionality. I sound like they sponsored me. They really did.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I'm like going through all their features, but they also have a built-in functionality where you can create flashcards with like you can highlight something and create a flashcard. I personally think it's more valuable to write your own flashcards, like I said before. So I would continue to use Anki.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so you've already mentioned Kaplan, Next Step, Anki, and UWorld. Did you have any other research recommendations?
I think those 4 are the big ones. With Kaplan, if you buy the 7-book set, you get the 3 exams with it. So that's how I got the 3 full-length practice exams. So I recommend those books. I thought they were really great. People have differing opinions on this, but I felt like they had all the information I needed, and I referred to them till the end. Like if I needed more explanation or more context, I wore out those books. I ended up donating them after I was done. You know, I think they're that valuable, but I really think it's a good set of books. I don't think it should be your only resource, but I think it's a good place to get like a condensed, complete, book of the information you need to know. Next Step was good. I just used their full-length exams. That's all. I didn't use any of their other material. I think Next Step style questions are closer to AAMC questions than Kaplan's. I structured my studying that way, knowing that. I started off with my Kaplan full lengths because I wanted to start with the material that was farthest from the most realistic material. Then I moved to Next Step, and then I moved to like AAMC question pack section banks, and then the last like 3 to 4 weeks were the full length exams from AAMC, the official one. So highly recommend you save those till the end. Definitely because you want to be at your strongest as a test taker, because it'll give you the most realistic assessment of what your capabilities are.
Nice. What about the half-length AAMC? Should you save that till the end as well?
I actually took that at the beginning, and I forget what my percentage breakdown was. I used a score converter. I don't remember what the score was, but I took that with a grain of salt because these converters are online converters that people created. AAMC doesn't score the exam. So I took that in the beginning. I don't know if I would change that. I think taking it at the beginning kind of gave me a taste of what AAMC was like. But at the same time, I do think the philosophy of keeping all AAMC material till the end is pretty sound. So I would leave that up to your listeners. I think it was valuable in the beginning, but I saved the rest of the material till the end. So it's really up to you.
Yeah, it's good to know. So I wanted to dive into the different sections, and I think you've already kind of talked about a lot of them. So let's start with Chem Phys. Now, that, from my understanding, it was your toughest section, but at the same time, you scored a 132, which is your highest score in Chem Phys. So how did you study for Chem Phys? Anything new that you have to share with us? And do you have any advice for students who are just currently struggling with that section on the Mcad?
Sure. So I think it's hilarious that I got a 132 and
Yeah.
I thought that was so funny. When I opened my score, I was just excited about like my total score, but then when I finished jumping around and telling everyone I knew, I like went back to look at the report and I was
Yeah.
like, seriously, a 132 in my weakest section. Kind of makes sense because the last few weeks I was like drilling UWorld chem and physics questions. So, it makes sense from the perspective that I was spending most of my time on that towards the end because I wanted to make sure I mastered it. Because like I said, confidence is a huge deal. There were times when I would be doing a section bank and I would be doing really poorly and I would have to take a step back and ask myself what the issue was. A lot of the time, it's confidence. I had to give myself pep talks in those moments, and my husband also gave me pep talks, but
Nice.
yeah, he'd just be like, you need to go back and practice. Like, it's okay. Like, it's better to, fail now rather than fail on the real thing. Not to say that anything less than what I scored is a failure, but I just mean
Yeah.
it's better to have those crises of confidence when you're practicing rather than having a crisis of confidence on test day. So a lot
Right.
of times it's confidence. So I feel like my confidence was weak in that area because I felt like I hadn't taken these classes in a really long time, and I had to start from a baseline that was much lower in the other areas of my study. But UWorld was super valuable. I would say that you have to keep doing practice questions. Don't just get the right or wrong answer and then brush it off and say, oh, I'll definitely get this next time. You have to understand why you got the wrong answer, and not just the wrong answer. You have to understand why you got the right answer, because we've all had experiences where we got the correct answer, but then got it correct for the wrong reason. But then you just kind of brush it off because you're like, oh, I got it right. Big deal. I'll move on. You cannot do that on the Mcat. You have to grate your teeth and dive in when it comes to chemistry and physics. The only way to get better is to keep practicing. If you don't understand a concept, keep going back over and over and over again until you finally mastered it, and that mastery will show. On the day of the exam, because CMP is the first section, and because I was experiencing so much nervousness, I actually panicked right at the beginning of the Mcat. Well, I just had so much test nerves and I was freaking out, and I felt like I was in like the first 10 questions, I swear I picked at random. Like I was panic kicking things, and then I had to pause and use that practice and wisdom that I incorporated and cultivated when I was studying, which was I had to take a step back and say, listen, you're going to be okay. This is just a test. If you don't do as well as you want to, you can always retake it and you're fine. Everything is okay. Take deep breaths. And I just kind of calmed down, and I swear everything went so much better after that. And thankfully I finished with enough time to go back to the beginning and correct those answers that I just chose at random. But reiterating this, the confidence that you feel and the calmness that you experience all play a huge role in how you perform. So if you're listening to this and you're a nervous test taker, I definitely think that incorporating some mindfulness meditation and really learning to take full lengths under practice conditions and work through that anxiety and nervousness is so important. It's just as pivotal to your success as mastering the material is. Hopefully that answered your question. I know there was a lot I went into.
No, for sure. This is all really helpful. So, which section would you feel was your second weakest, and what could you have done differently when studying for it?
It's funny because, like I said, I always thought CMP was my weakest, and that ended up not being the case on exam day. I would probably say my weakest after that would be the psych and soc, just because like I had taken psychology and sociology as a freshman when I was at Rutgers as an undergrad. I had taken 0 psych or soc since then, so it was kind of the same problem as chemistry and physics. The difference though is that for chem and physics, first of all, I'm a math person. I was a computer science major and a math minor, so I've always loved math. My weakness in the first section, or my perceived weakness, wasn't because I didn't enjoy it. I really did. It's just there was so much I had to learn. But I think psych and soc is different because you have these psychological and sociological concepts that you really need to know the names of, and there's a lot of contextual information that goes into understanding those phenomena. Whereas for CMP, if you understand, general concepts and formulas and you know how to use them, I think it's easier to kind of logic your way out of a question. Whereas in psych and soc, if you don't know the name of a concept or a theory, you're just guessing in the dark.
Right.
So I would say that section is my weakest only because I read the Kaplan book for the Psych and Soc section, and I went through that handout. Hopefully I can find it after and give it to you if you wanted to put it in the show notes for anyone
Yeah,
who's
that would be great.
but I read that compilation of notes from Khan Academy, and I just did my Anki flashcards, and I tried to, memorize as much as I could using Anki. So
Mm.
I would say that was my weakest section, just because I was limited to being able to do that as much as I would have liked to delve deeper into those concepts, because I really did like those subjects. I
Mhm.
was so constrained by time.
Right. And I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to kind of zoom through like the next really important question. So I really wanted to get your insights on cars as well as biochem, because like your scores in those were like some of the highest that a lot of people usually get in their entire scorecard. So whatever your strategies for those would be really valuable to hear.
Okay, so for cars, I would say that I've always been a reader and I've always done well in critical reading style exams. So
Hmm.
I was never that stressed about cars, because I know some people don't feel this way, but I honestly really enjoyed reading the cars passages. Most of the time they were interesting to me, unless they were about like architecture or something. But most of the
Right.
time I was reading them. That was just fun for me. And I was actually surprised my highest section wasn't on cars, because it consistently was when I was practicing. So just goes to show
Oh, wow.
you won't necessarily always reproduce the same results on test day that you did when you were studying, or that you had
Hmm.
when you were studying. So I would say for cars, my number one piece of advice would become a reader. Like, don't just practice cars questions. Start reading
Hmm.
the newspaper, start reading the New Yorker, the New York Times, just a variety of different newspapers with quality writing. Read the comment section, read people's opinions, try and deduce what the tone is, what people are saying, what the main idea is. That's really valuable. Pick up a challenging novel, pick up one of the classics. I know people's study time is constrained, so if you have like
Right.
3 to 6 months, it's hard to really read a full novel in the time that you're
Yeah.
all studying for the MCAT. But I think if you have more time, and if you're listening to this in advance of your study time for the MCAT, that's a really good way to prepare in advance. But if you don't have that time, then just spend some time reading like the New Yorker every morning, reading the Wall Street Journal, and get good at reading, become a fast reader, and try and deduce the tone and main idea from anything you read. Like I said, I've always loved reading, so that wasn't a problem for me. For B&B,
Nice.
I would say luckily, I had taken some biology classes before studying for the Mcat, so I didn't feel like I was totally in the dark in this arena, but I had never
Hmm.
done research. So I think one of the most challenging things about B&B is understanding the information, because they are from real research papers, and being able to draw out your knowledge and apply it. I would say this isn't something that I did, but going back, I probably would. Read some research papers on your own time, similar to how you would do for cars, and make sure you understand the underlying biological concepts. I think that's actually easier than being able to do the critical reading. So I would say if you master the critical reading portion, understanding the underlying concepts is easier, because, just understanding mitosis or meiosis, like that's something that you can learn and hopefully pull up a YouTube video or a resource that you can teach yourself that with. It's a lot harder to pull out the pieces of important information from a research paper that you've never read or seen before when you're under time pressure. So I think mastering that and reading research papers could really help with that.
Wow, that's some great advice. So it's MCAT day, and I know you spoke a little bit about the anxiety. What happened during that day? How did you prep for it the night before? If you could just walk us through your MCAT day, that'd be really interesting to hear.
Sure. So the day before, people say don't study. I'm not that kind of person. I need to study the day before. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I wish I could give you a different answer, but that's the kind of person I am. But the
yeah.
day before, I went through orgo mechanisms, because I had kind of slacked off on orgo because I took it like a year prior and I just didn't want to go into it in detail again. So really the last couple of days, I was like drilling my orgo mechanisms, and I'm
Hmm.
practicing chem and phys questions on UWorld. By 6 p.m., I was like, I'm done. I'm just going to relax. I had dinner. I watched like Mad Men, and I went to bed really early, like 8:30 or
Mm.
9 o'clock. I didn't
Wow.
want to toss and turn all night. I know that can happen if you're feeling nervous or anxious. I think mindfulness meditation is so valuable and helpful here. So for your listeners, if you haven't heard of these apps before, I highly recommend downloading them. Try Headspace or Calm. They're two
Right.
apps where you can do guided meditation and they help you calm down. I didn't use them the night before, but I applied what I learned in using them. So before I
Hmm.
went to bed, I just took some time to take deep breaths, focus on my breathing, zoom out, and just remember why I was taking the MCAT. And I committed. I was like, I am not going to toss and turn all night. I'm not going to stay awake thinking about this. I'm just going to relax and treat it like any other night. I'm so thankful I was able to get a good night's sleep. So that's number one. Make sure you get to bed early, and don't just go to bed early and toss and turn. Really get to bed early. If your sleep schedule is out of whack because you've been studying, you need to correct that like a week before or 2 weeks before the exam. Start going to bed early and waking up early, because that can really mess you up. If you are used to like staying up till 3 a.m. and waking up at 1, that can really mess you up on test day if you haven't corrected that. So make sure to correct that. I slept well, woke up early. I wake up early every day, so that wasn't a problem for me. In the morning, I did 10 minutes of vigorous exercise. Exercise is incredible for stimulating your brain. It helps you think more clearly. It improves your cognitive health over the long term. So throughout your entire study period, you should still be exercising. That will actually help you be a better learner. It'll make you feel better and make you more productive. But also on test day, take a brisk walk or do like 10 minutes of jump roping or jumping jacks or anything of that nature, because it really will get your blood flowing. It will help you think better. I swear by it. Anytime I have an important day, an interview, a test, I always make sure to get some exercise in. So I just did 10 minutes, and, my husband came with me to the test center, which was really nice because, he gave me encouraging words. If you have someone who will come with you to the test center and who can give you those encouraging words of support, I highly recommend it. That was helpful for me. And then, like I said earlier, I mentioned it briefly, but the first section of the Mcat, when I first started, I was like panicking, freaking out, choosing things at random. But that's when my mindfulness kicked in. Like, I basically applied what I've been doing throughout my study. I just had to sit back, take a deep breath, and remind myself that it was okay. And I swear it was like a switch flipped. Like, it completely changed my experience taking the test. And after I got over that first section, which had always been like the Goliath of like my test taking experience, everything after that was relaxed, and I'm glad. Like I said, I always love cars. So knowing the car section was next and I was going to spend the next hour and a half just reading was exciting for me. I'm such a loser. People are probably rolling their eyes.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like, and then once I got through that midway point, I actually did push-ups and some jumping jacks during my break between the first two and the last two, because like I said, the blood flow is really important. That helped me keep my nerves down. And yeah, so in summary, exercise, make sure you're taking care of your body by eating well, make sure you're exercising on a regular basis, and practice mindfulness meditation. If you don't want to download Headspace or Calm, you can always go to YouTube and just pick out any guided meditation. I did that sometimes on some of my most strenuous, difficult days, and it really makes a difference. I wouldn't be recommending it if it didn't make a difference for me.
Yeah, for sure. That's huge. So now walk us through the day that when you actually got your score back. What was going through your head before and after? What was your reaction like? That's always nice to hear.
I was really, really nervous. That month of waiting was miserable. It's funny because I told myself after the exam, I was like, I am not going to spend all my time thinking about this. I'm just going to live life. But I didn't do that, unfortunately. I, fully freaked out, the whole month after the MCAT. I don't recommend that. I think if you have better, self-control than I did, just take it easy that month, because your score is your score and you can't do anything to change it. But the morning of, I was like pacing and freaking out, and I knew the score was going to come out around 11 a.m. So when it was 11 a.m., I kept refreshing the score release page. And I remember, like, it lists the dates that you've taken the exam. So I remember refreshing and the date popped up, which meant that my score is available. And I was like, oh my God, this is the moment. And when I clicked it, I was so excited. I cried, which was nice because like the previous months I was crying because I was stressed out. I was finally crying because I was happy. I had worked so hard, and I just felt like all my hard work was validated in that moment. So I can't tell you how exciting that was. I had also submitted my primary application already, and the advice that I read online was make sure to only submit to a couple of schools. Don't submit to like the whole host of schools, because you don't know where your score is going to be. So you don't want to spend all that money, and you don't want to be considered a reapplicant if your score isn't what you want it to be. So it was a great feeling that day to just basically apply to all the schools that I wanted to apply to and not feel like any of my numbers were going to hold me back.
Wow. That's so inspiring. And I'm so glad you shared that. That's great. So last question, what are your plans now? Do you have any updates? What's in your short-term future and long-term future? What's your vision? And also, what's your vision for where you want to be in the next 5 or 10 years?
So I definitely want to be the most effective doctor I can possibly be. Like, that's my primary
Mm-hmm.
goal right now. I want to continue working on positivity. So I'm probably going to change the name soon. So just letting your listeners know in case someone's listening
Oh,
in like a year and the name is different. Hopefully I'll circle back with you when that change happens. But I
yeah,
just
for
want to be
sure.
an effective doctor. I want to continue writing as much as I can because I think free resources online are really helpful for people. And I would love to get involved in some public health initiatives because, like I said, I really care about healing chronic disease. And I think I would love to do that on an individual basis as a doctor, but
Mm-hmm.
also on a community and societal level with
Mm-hmm.
public health initiatives related to lifestyle medicine.
Nice. That's really inspiring. And I'm obviously going to link in the notes to your blog. And whenever you do change the URL or anything like that, let me know. So then we'll update that in the notes. And yeah, on that note, like where can our listeners just follow you and just get connected with you besides your blog, if there is anywhere?
Sure. So I actually have an Instagram and I have my main blog. So you can feel free to sign up for my email list on
Nice.
positive.com. I publish new articles there very frequently on all things health and fitness. And sometimes I talk about things like the Mcat and, being someone who's applying to medical school. And then you can
Mm-hmm.
also follow me on Instagram, Positivity. So
Nice.
you'll know it when you see it.
Great. Yeah. So I'll link to all of that. Thank you. Was there any, I don't know, last minute advice that you had for anybody who's kind of struggling or just feeling burnt out, is sad or anything of that nature? Like as a mentor, as a big sister, anything to say to them?
Yeah, so I would say number one, I totally understand what you're going through, and I'm sorry, but unfortunately, it's something you just have to go through if you want to be a doctor. This is the first test of your commitment to that, so make sure you're really solid on your purpose and why you want to go to medical school. I find that zooming out and just acknowledging why you're going through this in the first place really puts everything into perspective, and that's helpful. Number two, I think mindfulness meditation and just more broadly, self-care, taking care of
Mm-hmm.
yourself. Don't let self-care go by the wayside because you're studying for this exam. If you're feeling miserable or burnt out in the moment, take a cup to put your books away and spend time with family members. Go outside, take a walk, meditate, do a
Mm-hmm.
face mask, hang out with friends, all of that. Anything that makes you
Yeah.
better and that will rejuvenate you, definitely apply it. My final piece of advice would be to make sure you're eating right. Make sure you're eating, your fruits and vegetables because that really has a huge impact on your anxiety levels. Most serotonin is actually produced in your gut. So,
Mm-hmm.
it makes a huge difference to be eating a healthy diet. If you're just eating junk food all the time and lots of caffeine and stimulants, it's going to make your mood worse. So just
Right.
overall, just take care of yourself. I know you can do it and you have to believe that. So just know that I believe in you and I really hope you do too.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And I enjoyed this. You're very articulate. And thank you so much for sharing all your insights. Good luck with all that you have coming up with your blog and your goals. And we wish you all the best on your journey.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving me this platform and inviting me. I really hope that this is helpful to your listeners. I really appreciate your time today.
Hey, this is Sam again, and before you go, I want to thank you for listening all the way through. We've been researching and interviewing top Mcat scorers for many years now, with the goal of piecing together the most optimal and efficient Mcat study system on the planet. And not only have we accomplished that, but with every new interview, every new top scorer that we come across, we refine this system a little bit further. And the reason it works and has yielded so many top scorers leaving our community and getting into med school is because we're not focused on delivering content, at least not yet. We're focused on the system, the strategy, the mindset, the approach to studying for this exam and all the individual sections within it. Because to us, it's not about what you know, it's about how you apply what you know, how you think through this exam. That's what has led so many of us at Mcat Mastery on the Mcat Mastery team and so many of the students that we tutor to get competitive scores and increase scores by 10 or more points in just weeks and ultimately get into med school. So if you want to learn more about our Mcat strategy system and even read some case studies, then I'll link to our resources below, one of which is our free top scorer Mcat strategy course. At the time of this episode, over 10,000 pre-meds have joined and are improving their scores for free. So I highly recommend you check that out and enroll. And until next time, remember that the Mcat does not define you. Mastering the Mcat is all about how you approach it. You have what it takes to get through this. You have what it takes to get into med school, and you got this.